As you mentioned earlier, my name is Emmanuel Apau, Chief Technology Officer at Mechanico, which is my own small private consulting firm, which I've had for about 3 years, but now I'm just going to be more proactive in doing my marketing and to enable me to find contracts and things like that. So been in the tech space for about 10 years now, mostly doing a lot of software development and more so DevOps engineering these days, AWS certified work. And kind of been in worked in different sectors, whether that's public sector, private sector, nonprofit. I feel like it's kind of given me a good general view of the type of work that's going on in the DC area. Also including startups, things like that.
Emmanuel, let's jump into the first question here, shall we?
Sure.
What is open source versus proprietary technology? What are some popular examples that are used in enterprise technology today as well?
Yeah, sure. So I guess, real simple explanation would be, I look at open source as, transparent coding done in a public setting. So for example, it would be code bases in GitHub or code bases in GitLab where anybody can just go in and take a look at the source code. It's free. And so anybody can just go and create a PR, a pull request to merge updates or make their own custom edits to that application. That's what I would define open source as. Proprietary, though, on the other hand, is more of a black box software development methodology where you don't provide the source code to anybody. Maybe you might provide like an API so people can interact with your application, but nobody really knows what's going on in the back end. And that's usually a paid service being built by a company. So to answer your question, some examples of that, some really popular ones are like Kubernetes. Kubernetes is super open, super popular as well. And that's being backed by the Google team. So that's always a good indicator when you're using an open source library that is backed by a company that at least shouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon.
And what do you think are some of the benefits of open source technology? You listed things like Kubernetes, but just going even, I guess, broader, what are some open source technologies you've seen kind of evolve for more of the value side? Like who is actually getting a lot of this value by using open source technology? Is it startups? Is it enterprises? Is it just up and coming developers, who are learning how to build on this new technology stack?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of all of the above, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody, as developers, we typically tend to reinvent the wheel a lot. Where if you have a conversation between a group of 10 developers, you'll find out that a lot of us have built the same features over and over again. So these open source libraries kind of help expedite that. Let's say, for example, you need to build a content management system. Like there's a lot of content management systems out there. So and a lot of them are being still built privately by proprietary teams. But you could go to the open source, for example, there's one, if you're a Django fan in the Python stack, there's one called Wagtail that I've used in the past, and that's completely open source. And they are building a content management system that you can pretty much just lift and install into your own ecosystem and customize from there. Dramatically speeds up development time because now you're not reinventing the wheel. There's a bunch of common features that you expect out of a content management system. So if it has that, you can just take it and then customize from there. And I think that's the most beneficial part of it because it's readily available. You don't have to pay for it, and you can use. And I've used it for like government contracts. For example, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Their website is being managed by Wagtail, and that just goes to show like the benefits of these types of open source tools being widely used at universities and all these different types of places.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different use cases, and kind of riding on that wave. Do you think that a lot of the changes that have happened, do you think it's from a perspective of trust changing? Or I guess the question I'm trying to ask you is, let's take Apple, for example. Xcode, a tool that they use to develop all their iOS apps, and different other cross-platform application. It was something that they guarded, in their safe house for a very long time. Just recently, a couple of years ago, they chose to make Xcode open source. So do you think that it's the developers that are kind of pushing this open source movement, or do you think it's like consumer tech with consumers being more trusting? Because, back, a couple of years ago, 10 to 15 plus years ago, consumers trusted, I would say, the base level technology, or even things like newspapers, different other forms of technology, more from who was actually creating it, the publisher, different things like that. I would say now we have this shift where people are deriving their own truths. But yeah, the question is, are the developers pushing it, the growth and expansion, because a lot of things have changed, or is it like consumer tech demand? Maybe there are things you can do cheaper or quicker, like for example, a open source machine learning algorithm or something like that. A lot of these data hungry or data optimized algorithms need a lot of data. People are finding that open source technology kind of thrives there.
Yeah, that's a good question. If I was to pick, I'd probably say the developers are the ones that kind of pushing the agenda, because a lot of times, more times than not, when you bring in a new tool into your development ecosystem, you have to kind of fight for that tool. You have to explain, why do you now want to bring in some tool from this random person or has created, and and why do you want to use it? Why is it beneficial? And it being open source kind of also helps push that argument, because you're like, well, we have the code. I mean, we can see if there's any bad actor features going on. We can see if there's any security holes, things like that. Like, we have full control over what we're bringing into our ecosystem versus a black box tool where you don't really know what it's doing behind the scenes, So, and to be honest, like when you brought up machine learning, that's a huge place where open source has been super beneficial, because I look at open source libraries as a toolbox. You know what I'm saying? Institutions are building toolboxes and saying, here, we have all these tools, go and build something cool with it. And you don't have to worry about building your own tools. Like, I think people kind of get hung up building their own toolbox without actually building the product. So it just helps speed up all that stuff.
Yeah, actually, we got to save that quote after we're done recording this. I really like that quote, because I do think that is correct. It's kind of like all these enterprises and different developers have totally changed their mind, to give their software and technology out for free. You're totally right. It is a toolbox.
Yeah, for sure.
And, Emmanuel, in the past 10, 15 years, right, you've seen these open source platforms such as Linux, Android, Chrome OS, Norman, like FreeBSD come up. And do startups or enterprises benefit more from open source technology versus closed IP?
I mean, yeah, because usually the main MO in a startup, I would imagine, is build things quickly and test. It's hard to build things quickly, like my previous analogy, when you're still building the tool set. So you can skip a lot of steps in getting your product to the finish line by using these open source tools. And I would imagine you don't have a lot of money in the beginning when you're a startup, so you might not be able to afford a lot of these proprietary tools. So I would definitely say it has helped the speed at which startups are able to go from MVP to like a final product, for sure.
And kind of going off of that, we don't have to go too deep, but I know you've kind of dabbled in some of your own projects with open source technologies using GitHub. What do you think are some of the best industry practices when collaborating using open source tools? And what is like some of your advice, or like how do you get started? You just said, like, if I'm a startup, I can get into a lot of these tool sets very quickly. I don't have to develop my own CMS, my own authentication, different things like that. So like, how do we get started the right way?
So I would probably say some of the well, at least I would hope that the tools, the open source tools out there, begin to focus on documentation more. That's always been a sore point when it comes to these open source libraries because, I mean, if I'm building a tool that I've created for myself, documentation might not be high on my list because I understand what's going on underneath. So I might just throw it out there. You can use it by doing X, Y, Z, and that's it. But people might need more details than that to really get a full understanding of your software. So I would say documentation is huge. It's another reason why actually I wrote a blog recently on standing up a multi-cluster Elasticsearch instance using OpenDistro, which is another open source tool. The reason I felt like I needed to open the blog is just because their documentation was just a little lacking in being able to resolve a couple of the nuance or little issues I had just trying to spin up a cluster. So that's definitely key. I would say also having your issues sorted in a way that if you want collaboration, people can understand which ones are like a good first issue to get into, like rank them by difficulty. There's a tool, I'm trying to remember the name. They're called Falcon. It's like a minimalistic Python web server. And they do a great job in sorting their issues out on GitHub so that you know, like, what are the really, really simple ones I can get in and knock out quickly, or what are the more interesting problems with the server that I can now be aware of and maybe even help them. And even if I don't want to help them, now I'm aware. As a developer, if I bring in that Falcon server, I can say, these are some obvious issues that already exist, so I can now plan and strategize for that in my development lifecycle.
So if you could name like three of the top things. Let's say I'm getting started and I want to develop open source technologies or use them. Like, what are 3 good practices I should have as soon as I get started? Like me personally, I learned how to use GitHub in an enterprise environment when I interned at the Washington Post. It's not something they even taught me in school. So like a lot of people, in our area, Washington, DC area, like tech is growing here. A lot of these companies, Amazon, Walmart, they're all moving in. So, a lot of these are not taught in school. So yeah, what do you think? Top 3?
Yeah, top 3, definitely put a license in your repo. That's super important. That kind of establishes how you want people to use your software, whether they're allowed to copy or change any code within your repo without your consultation. I think that's super important just to protect yourself from a legality perspective. What else? GitHub is a great place to deploy your code, just mainly because they were purchased by Microsoft, and it kind of feels like ever since they got bought, pushing out new features like every week. And they never used to do that before. And one really, really great feature, which I think is huge for the community, is GitHub sponsors. It's a way for you to kind of tip or even sponsor the developers building the tools that you're using. Because before, this was all free. People are working for free pretty much in the open source world.
Yeah.
And you kind of run the risk of having a great tool being developed by somebody and that's their passion project. And then life comes into play and now they don't have the time to work on that tool anymore. And so now it goes a year or 2 without updates because they're busy dealing with real life. Now you can support these developers and that could be their full-time job. So that's always something to think about in the future where if your tool builds up steam, you have an option of actually being paid to manage it. So that's also good. And then, of course, another great thing to have in your open source tooling is one, great documentation, as I said earlier, on how to use your tool, but also really rules of collaboration. Like there's a file it's usually called a contributing.md, and that kind of defines if you want to contribute to this repo, these are the type of steps you need to do.
Go ahead, Kunal.
Yeah, Emmanuel, just taking a quick jump here, I wanted to talk a bit about cloud wars, right? You got the Google Cloud, you have Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, and Salesforce, and all these companies, right, that are building these very solid platforms. And there's a lot of competition in regards to this, such as, these companies such as potentially more recently, the Google Cloud and SAP partnering to, edge over Microsoft, for example. What do you believe the future of cloud wars is? And will there be more cross-platform adaptability because of this?
Yeah, 100%. I think the cloud wars is great. is great to remove the Amazon monopoly because, you know, I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
people have been trying to build cloud services for a long time now, and Amazon got it right. They're the first ones to get it right and the first ones to capitalize on getting it right. And it really took these other bigger agencies a while to realize that, okay, these guys are onto something. People don't want to work on physical machines anymore. They'd rather just have machines as a service. So, so yeah, it's great in that respect because it helps reduce the cost of cloud because Amazon can be quite expensive. Sometimes people don't always take that into account. But I think we're gonna get to a point where you're gonna have these different agencies, Google, Microsoft, Azure, and Amazon, specialize in certain services. Because you can't be great at everything. You can't boil the ocean. Eventually, there's going to be certain services that are better on each of these providers. So I can potentially see, like even right now, Google being great at Kubernetes. They have a wonderful Kubernetes engine that you can get spun up really, really quickly and have your Kubernetes clusters managed in a very same, simple fashion. But that's just one part of the puzzle. Then you might have your ML and data science services that Microsoft seems to be excelling in, all hosted in Azure Cloud. And then for everything storage, maybe all your relational databases and all of your file locked storage sitting in Amazon, and they all have to communicate because that's what they excel in. And one company, HashiCorp, has actually been pushing that agenda more so and kind of positioning themselves in a way to take advantage of these cloud wars, so to speak, because people are going to want to use the best service of each, but we need to be able to communicate. And that networking can sometimes be difficult because they don't necessarily want you to communicate with these other cloud providers because they have their own services too that they prefer you just kept in state in their ecosystem. So let's see. HashiCorp just pushed out something called Cloud Collaboration recently, and that's kind of like their SaaS product and spinning up these multi-cloud environments. And I can only see that conversation moving in that direction.
And I'm glad you brought up kind of your perspective on this, because one thing I wanted to kind of talk about was like sometimes people forget about that. You know, a large amount of cloud usage is still driven by companies like Oracle, and I think the reason for this is maybe a lot of new developers. You know, like you mentioned, Google and Amazon each have their, like, the Google cloud platform versus AWS. Mm-hmm. One question is, do you think there's going to be any sort of divergence with specific, let's say, specific things you can do on one cloud platform versus another? For example, with Alexa, Amazon has been collecting a lot of contextual and voice data, which Google, I would say, is still a bit behind on because they might have the best search engine, mm-hmm. a lot of AI and smart learning, but they definitely don't have those devices in the house to that level yet. And yeah, the other question is, do you think that one platform will sort of win in the end? Because these platforms are designed, like you said, to make sure that you don't leave them. Once you're locked in, you got to keep providing more and more services. But I would say there's more and more competition, as Kunal also said. So yeah, well, my question is, do you think one cloud platform will beat another one based on a particular feature? Like, what can Google Cloud do better than Amazon?
Yeah, I think I definitely touched on this, that I don't think there will be a winner. I think they're going to end up having their own specialties. Like you said, Amazon has that large storage of Alexa information that they can now use to maybe analyze voices and do all sorts of interesting things. And then Google Google Cloud Engine has Kubernetes. Azure has a lot of their ML as a service services. They're all going to specialize eventually and be known for these individual services. And then you're just going to have to do the networking work to combine them and have them play together nicely. So I don't think there'll be a winner. I do see Google Cloud struggling a little bit because Microsoft definitely seems to be snatching up a lot of these defense contracts, but eventually they're all going to be known for an individual for specific set of features, and developers are going to actually be the ones that define. Okay, we'll use Azure here for this reason, and use Google Cloud Engine over here for another reason, and so on and so forth in the future.
And so that's interesting. You think there might always sort of be a war if there's no real outright winner? Because as big as Amazon is, there's still other solutions from companies like IBM and Oracle. Now, do you think that because of I guess to preface it a bit, for a lot of people listening to this, even if you're technical, people still don't know that, the internet is run with wires with undersea cables, right? Things like that. So still for things like cloud, someone told me sort of a funny joke. It's it's not that the servers just disappear. It's just they're so in close proximity in server farms that stretch miles and miles and miles. So it's just it's just getting repurposed. So do you think that there might be a breach of power per se with some of these technologies, kind of getting back into the open source talk? Companies like Facebook, they've created some of their own open source technologies, let people develop front ends with, say, React, right? It's like an industry standard to use things like React now. Just me, coming from a technical background, sometimes I see this new movement as a little bit worrisome if people don't know what they're doing, because a package developed by Facebook or something like that, it can quickly spread to all regions of the world because it's open source. Yeah. And Facebook might still be the one maintaining a lot of these packages. So it's basically I'm not asking you to get technical, but I'm kind of in the dependency type of vibe, right? Is what I'm asking you. We're depending on these companies, and they also have a lot of dependencies, quote unquote. So we got to fix that in some way. I don't think that part has been fixed yet or even decided, right? It's what happens when something goes wrong, if you want to have some perspective on that, because we've been talking a lot about competition, things getting better, more efficient, but still want to talk about okay, then why haven't we seen more, and why don't we have even better tech? For example, cars. I think cars could really improve around this region.
Yeah. I think you touched on quite a few questions that are definitely important to think about. So, for example, like you said with React, it is backed by Facebook, and so let's say there's a critical bug that might be impacting you and your specific software development team, but they're not pushing out patches quick enough. That's one of the benefits of open source is you can technically do it yourself. But granted, that's easier said than done because they have context behind the tool that they've been building. But there have been instances of where companies like, for example, Elasticsearch, they used to be open source. And eventually they got to a point where they said, hey, our product is so popular, I don't think we need to be giving this out for free. We're now going to put future updates behind a paywall and get people to now pay us for our service. The developers saw that as kind of shady, and what did they end up doing? They then forked Elasticsearch repo, created their own open distro, which is still open, and they're pushing updates that way. Granted, now that's backed by Amazon, but I think where there's a will, there's a way. I think if Facebook ever decided to say, React is super popular, it's being used by 80% of front-end developers, now you have to pay for it, somebody will now go and fork it and create React 2. And then that will continue in development. So that's kind of one of the cool features of being open source. You can end up unblocking yourself when these type of situations occur, assuming you have a dedicated force of developers who want to keep that tool maintained.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's sort of it's never really completely broken because someone out there can pick up or roll back on previous commit or something like that and keep it going from there. Whatever the longest chain is, it's a different type of community, the open source community. I would say, it's a lot of good people out there helping others learn. I think how you addressed it earlier, like learn how to actually commit to these projects, because you're right, it is a system, like proposing, implementing, and possibly even getting funded. So to kind of close out our talk today, I want to kind of get into what are some pieces of advice for engineers building today. It can kind of be, call it recent grads to junior level developers, sort of, who maybe missed the open source like technology movement. But as you said, now almost every enterprise is interfacing with the open source technology stack. And what I've seen is a lot of people reach out to people younger in their careers, even, only because they're like, I'm not used to learning how to work together with other colleagues or people. I can say from my experience, at school, you basically do projects, right? You're not really doing things that have, I would say, real value, like real impact. I always personally hated that. And when I interned at the Washington Post, that was for the first time I learned how to use GitHub. And, I actually did start writing some documentation. So I was like, I learned it luckily through an internship. But for the people out there who are listening to this, maybe want to get in, and they're kind of deciding, right? Do I want to learn Java or something more proprietary, all different types, or do I want to, specialize in, like you said, you could even specialize in GitHub. So yeah, what are some tips or general advice?
Yeah, sure. I definitely do think attempting to contribute to open source projects is important, because I look at an open source project, as you mentioned, as a group project. That's really what it is. It's just a very big, open, public group project. And with every group project, you're going to have the people that do more work than the others.
Yeah, I was about to say, hopefully I'm not doing it. But you can see all that on GitHub, who's doing all the work. So that's a good thing, right?
So the main contributors are kind of like the people who do more of the work, and the guy who, guy or girl that slept or got sick that week during the group project, and now you're presenting it to the teacher, and they kind of come in and just add like a README and then call it a day. You can do all sorts of things and when it comes to an open source. So, but it's still a contribution, though. It's still important. So I think for people in school or just coming out of school to kind of get in the habit of being able to work with other developers that you don't know on a project, you should try and just look up. I'm sure if you Google like popular open source projects, you'll find a whole list of them, and then just get into the repo and just kind of see what they need help with and put out your PR and then see what happens, because it's a great way to kind of in the community. Because I mean, granted, it is the internet, so beware the comments that you might get, but I think it's a learning experience that would be beneficial for your future professional career for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's just so cool that you don't even have to ask for permission, unlike school. You just jump in, and if it gets accepted, like I would say it's a new form of credibility, basically, as a developer, showing your work.
Definitely credibility, because I do see GitHub being that's the most popular Git service out there, being like your technical resume. A lot of recruiters now are saying, show me your GitHub profile. Let me see the projects you're contributing to. And if you don't contribute, then that's now a question you have to answer. So interesting how there's now a shift where people are beginning to recognize that open source is pretty popular, and it's to your benefit to begin to contribute to the community that you're taking so much from. Because we can only, I believe in taking as much information and free tools out there, but I do believe people should eventually begin to contribute to the ecosystem, because that's how it gets better.
Definitely.
Emmanuel, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. What would be the best point of contact if someone was interested in reaching out to you or connecting with you further on this?
Yeah, for sure. LinkedIn is a great place to find me. Emmanuel Apau, APAU. I think there's probably like 2 of us on LinkedIn, so you might be able to find me pretty quickly. And then, or even my Twitter at TechnoGrouch, TechnoGrouch. So, yeah, those are usually the best places to find me.